My name is Piper Dalton, and 1 week ago my own family turned dinner into a stage where I was the punchline. Savannah, my older sister, walked in glowing like a celebrity back from a world tour. Mom hovered over her and Dad pulled out an extra chair like royalty had arrived. I sat in my work hoodie, still carrying the smell of cardboard dust and forklift oil from the warehouse. I already knew what kind of night it would be. Savannah performed. Airports, champagne, waterfront views, private tables. She talked about connections and important people who adored her presence. She flashed new jewelry she did not earn. Every word sounded rehearsed for applause, and my parents gave it to her without hesitation. Their faces said, "This is the daughter we brag about." Then the spotlight swung toward me. It never sounds like concern. It sounds like a report. Piper is still moving boxes. Piper is still on night shift. Piper is still doing that job. They delivered those lines like a diagnosis. My mother nodded instead of defending me. My father smiled like physical work is a personal flaw. Heat climbed up my neck, not shame, something colder. I am the body they quietly rely on and the embarrassment they publicly distance from. I kept my shoulders square and refused to fold. Right there I made a decision. I would stop auditioning for respect in a house that already chose its favorite. The next position of control in this family would not belong to Savannah. It would belong to me. If you have ever been pushed to the bottom of your own family, tell your story in the comments, tap like, and subscribe so more people hear voices like ours. It took years of quiet endurance to become the kind of invisible that doesn't hurt anymore. I worked in the warehouse long enough for the fluorescent lights to hum like background music in my skull. Time wasn't measured in hours, but in pallets wrapped, boxes stacked, and barcodes scanned. The rhythm became mechanical, but the paycheck meant medicine for Grandpa Frank, groceries, and rent that never arrived late. That job wasn't glamorous. It was survival disguised as routine. While I was building reliability, Savannah was building her image. Every post she made looked like sunlight itself approved of her. Brand collaborations, networking events, creative partnerships, all those shiny words that mean someone else is paying. Mom called her courageous for traveling alone. Dad said she had vision. What I heard was that my stability was invisible, and her instability was art. The warehouse became a strange sort of mirror. It reflected how small I appeared in my own family's eyes and how steady I truly was when no one clapped. My coworkers joked, fought, got promoted, or quit. I stayed. Not because I loved it, but because I refused to need rescue. People like me are the background of every photograph. Blurred, necessary, forgotten. Grandpa Frank used to say there were two kinds of strength, one that shouts, and one that finishes the shift. He knew the second one built more than muscles, it built a backbone. When his health slipped a little, I didn't hesitate to cover bills or drive him to appointments. I'd clock out after midnight, stop by his house, and see the porch light waiting like an old friend. He always had leftover coffee in the pot and a half smile that said, "You did enough today." I never told him that his quiet approval meant more than any applause at Savannah's latest gallery event. Mom called those nights a waste of energy. Dad said I was stuck in the small stuff. But Grandpa Frank never once told me I was small. He had once run a construction firm decades ago, back when his hands were steady and his phone rang all day with clients. He never bragged, never lectured, just fixed broken things, wood, engines, people who lost direction. Through him, I learned the language of practical minds. Numbers, contracts, tools, not hashtags. He had a friend, Mr. Morales, who would sometimes stop by his porch with blueprints rolled under his arm and dust on his boots. Their conversations sounded foreign to me back then, commercial spaces, foreclosures, industrial lots. I'd sit on the steps and listen without understanding. What I caught, though, was respect. The kind men share when both have built something real and lost something along the way. Years later, when the warehouse started cutting hours, I thought I was losing ground, but Grandpa said it differently. "Maybe you're making room for the right thing." That line stuck to my ribs. He always believed opportunity didn't knock, it waited quietly until you were strong enough to open the door yourself. Savannah never noticed any of that. She thought Grandpa was a relic, and I was his caretaker. In truth, I was an apprentice, learning how to rebuild without an audience. Every shift I finished made me sharper, less sentimental. I understood contracts because I'd read his old ones. I recognized freight terms because I'd lived inside them. The warehouse was my unspoken degree. There's a strange peace in knowing the people who pity you have no idea what you're becoming. My family's conversations revolved around Savannah's next trip, Savannah's next outfit, Savannah's next promise to get serious soon. Meanwhile, I collected small proofs of independent savings, Repair skills, discipline, they measured success by photographs. I measured it by what I could handle when things broke. One night, months before that dinner, Grandpa Frank told Mr. Morales something I'll never forget. They thought I wasn't listening, but the walls in that old house carry whispers. Mr. Morales asked if I was reliable for a small favor, something about clearing a property. Grandpa didn't hesitate. He said, "She doesn't quit." 3 words. I didn't understand their weight until later. That was the night I realized my loyalty wasn't weakness. It was potential waiting for permission. My family's laughter at dinner only echoed their blindness. They thought I was stuck at the bottom of the ladder. In truth, I was learning how ladders were built. They celebrated appearances. I studied endurance. They floated. I anchored. It's ironic how the ones who brag about being ahead never notice when the ground beneath them starts to move. By the time Savannah's world began to shimmer under its own instability, I had already stopped asking for space at the table. I was building one of my own. Tomorrow would bring something I hadn't had in years, a chance that wasn't pity, and work that wasn't invisible. Morning carried the kind of stillness that feels like waiting. The parking lot behind the mall was nearly empty, puddles reflecting gray light, the air cold enough to smell like metal. I parked beside Grandpa Frank's old truck. He sat inside with the engine running, radio low, the quiet rhythm of someone who has already decided what comes next. I climbed in. His thermos was half full, his coat buttoned wrong, but his eyes were clear, the same eyes that used to read blueprints by lamplight. Across the cracked asphalt, a dark sedan pulled in. A man stepped out carrying a clipboard. That was the first time I met Mr. Morales, my grandfather's friend, the man whose name I'd heard murmured on that porch years ago. He didn't shake hands like a salesman. He nodded like someone used to solving problems instead of describing them. Mr. Morales explained things plainly, his voice steady and factual. There was a commercial warehouse on the east side of town, recently vacated after the tenant defaulted. The place was full of unclaimed merchandise equipment, shelving, boxes of unsorted inventory. The bank needed a detailed assessment before any legal recovery could happen. He needed someone to catalog everything, photograph damages, create a spreadsheet that could turn chaos into numbers. As he spoke, I realized I had been preparing for this without knowing. I knew how to read SKU codes, calculate cubic footage, and recognize how a warehouse breathes when it's used right versus when it's abandoned. Mr. Morales didn't offer pity. He offered purpose. He paused only once, watching me the way mechanics watch an engine before starting it. Grandpa sat quiet beside me, hands folded. Then Mr. Morales said, "Your grandfather told me you don't quit." Something shifted in my chest, a weight realigning. I didn't thank him. I didn't know how. I just nodded, because any word might break the moment. He outlined the arrangement. Payment would be tied to results, not hours. Independence disguised as a test. I would have access to the building keys, temporary insurance coverage, and his number if I needed verification for vendors. It wasn't charity. It was a contract without pretense. I imagined the warehouse, not as a place of repetition, but of control. My hands wouldn't just move boxes, they would record, value, decide. I would decide. That realization made my throat tighten. Then my phone buzzed. "Mom" on the screen. Reflex made my thumb hover. I answered only because silence always makes her louder later. Her voice came sharp and quick, layered with worry that sounded more like accusation. She warned me about men who promise easy work, and said Savannah heard, "Morales flips bankrupt properties, it could look bad if you're involved." The word "look" caught me. Everything in our family revolved around what looked right, not what was right. I looked out the windshield at the puddles, saw my own reflection ripple, and realized I didn't want to live through appearances anymore. When she paused, waiting for me to justify myself, I simply said nothing. Silence can be an answer when words are just chains. Grandpa watched me end the call. No judgment, no rescue, only quiet trust. That silence filled the car more powerfully than any speech. Mr. Morales handed me a folder. Inside were property details, photos of collapsed shelving, and a short list of contact names. The pages smelled like dust and ink. I held them as if they were a passport. For once, someone saw usefulness where others saw inconvenience. We drove separately to the site. The building was an echo chamber of neglect, metal beams, stripped wiring, shards of sunlight sneaking through roof vents. Every sound bounced twice before dying. It should have felt lonely. Instead, it felt like permission. I walked through the aisles, counting without being told. Each label, each scuff on the concrete floor spoke a language I understood better than conversation. For years, I had been taught that worth comes from elegance. That day, I learned it can come from precision. By the time I locked up, the air had warmed. The keys jingled in my pocket like proof. I stood by my car, staring at the sky, and thought about how strange it was to feel power in something so ordinary. Not pride, clarity. Later that afternoon, Grandpa texted 3 words. Proud of you. Nothing else. He never needed to explain. That night, I laid the folder on my kitchen table and opened a blank spreadsheet. The rows filled one by one, mechanical yet alive. For the first time, data wasn't numbers, it was independence written in code I could finally read. No one in my family would understand what this meant, but I didn't need them to. This wasn't about proving them wrong, it was about proving me right. I didn't know then that this project would unravel the hierarchy my family worshipped. But even if I had, I wouldn't have stopped. Tomorrow had already begun the moment I said yes. The first few days blurred into motion, quiet, measured, deliberate. I arrived at the warehouse before sunrise, the metal door groaning like it hadn't been touched in months. The smell of concrete dust mixed with cold air and machine oil. My flashlight caught particles dancing like small ghosts, proof that stillness had history. I started small. 1 aisle, 1 section, 1 spreadsheet. Item numbers turned into a pattern that only I could read. It was like translating a forgotten language, each barcode whispering what had been left behind. The floor plan unfolded in logic. Pallets in rows, damaged goods to the left, usable assets to the right. Mr. Morales checked in twice a day. He didn't hover, he verified. He treated my notes like reports, not guesses. His trust didn't sound like praise, it sounded like expectation. That difference mattered. It meant I wasn't being tested for pity but for precision. The first day ended with 23 pallets cataloged, a list of resale values, and a spreadsheet that finally looked like something worth sending. I uploaded it before dinner. 2 hours later, Mr. Cleese's lashes lyshi. Morales replied with 4 words. Efficient. Keep your rhythm. Simple, professional, and the most affirming sentence I'd ever received from anyone outside Grandpa Frank. Each morning built a new muscle in my mind. I stopped moving like a laborer and started thinking like a negotiator. I began noticing how small variables, placement, lighting, labeling, changed the perceived value of everything inside that warehouse. A dented generator in the corner might be worthless to a casual eye, but to the right buyer it was a repairable asset worth $300. I was no longer lifting weight. I was lifting numbers. Grandpa Frank visited once, standing by the loading dock with a coffee thermos in hand. He didn't say much, just watched as I moved through the aisles with confidence that hadn't existed a week before. His presence was quiet approval, the kind that doesn't need to be announced. He left me a note tucked under a wrench on the workbench. You're building more than they see. I folded it and kept it in my wallet. By the 3rd day, my report had expanded from a simple inventory to a financial overview: losses, estimated recovery, potential resale channels, Mr. Resale channels. Morales forwarded it to a property attorney and CC'd me in the email. Seeing my name in that thread changed something inside me. It meant I wasn't a background worker anymore. I was part of the equation. The bank representatives visited midweek. They expected chaos. Instead, they found order my charts pinned to the wall, color-coded tabs, and itemized lists taped neatly to shelves. They didn't know my name, but they used my data to make decisions. I stood in the corner, unnoticed, listening to them reference the report like it belonged to someone else. That anonymity didn't sting, it satisfied. Power doesn't always need applause. Sometimes it lives in the silence after competence. The work was hard but not heavy. My body adjusted to the pace, my mind sharpened. The echo of Savannah's laughter from that dinner faded completely. I stopped thinking about proving anything to her or to anyone else. Every keystroke became an argument in my favor without words. Mr. Morales called one evening, asking for clarification on a column total. His tone was purely business, and I realized he already considered me reliable. I corrected the number, resent the file, and he answered with a short, "Good eye." That was how mentorship worked between people who respected each other. It was silent, efficient, and real. At night, I'd sit on my couch, the glow of my laptop spilling across old notebooks filled with sketches and lists. I started making projections, cost of storage, depreciation rates, estimated margins if liquidated properly. I wasn't just working a project, I was designing a system. That realization made me straighten my spine. Mom texted once during that week, "Remember to eat, and stay out of messy business." I didn't reply. For the first time, silence felt like power instead of surrender. By the end of the week, Mr. Morales invited me to his office for a brief review. He slid a check across the desk payment for the first phase. The amount wasn't massive, but it was more than I'd ever earned in 1 week of warehouse work. My hands shook slightly as I signed the receipt. He told me another property might need assessment soon and he'd be in touch. Walking out of that building, I understood what Grandpa had meant years ago when he said strength isn't about shouting. It's about finishing the shift differently than you started it. That evening, I drove home with the windows down, the air sharp and bright against my face. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was escaping the warehouse. I felt like I had built something inside it. Later that night, as I uploaded my final summary and shut the laptop, my phone lit up. The screen glared with a single line of text that cut through the calm. "Call me. Now. Emergency." The sender was Savannah. I stared at it, not surprised, only curious about how quickly the balance had shifted. The sound of power wasn't thunder. It was silence waiting for your answer. The message sat on my screen like a wound that refused to close. "Call me now. Emergency." I didn't answer immediately. Power has its own gravity, and silence was its weight. The air in my apartment felt unusually still, heavy with the kind of quiet that follows long effort. For years, Savannah had been the center of our family's orbit. Now her panic reached me like static through glass. When I finally opened the message thread, the feed was filled with fragments, apologies, screenshots, blurred photos of her crying face from someone else's social media story. The girl who once lived in curated perfection was unraveling in public. I didn't scroll far. I didn't need to. The truth of collapse doesn't require many words. By the next morning, her name appeared in online gossip columns. One partnership had dropped her for unprofessional conduct. Another claimed contractual violations. A brand accused her of financial misrepresentation. The golden child had fallen, not with an explosion, but with a quiet implosion everyone pretended not to enjoy. Mom called me before breakfast, her voice sharp and breathless, tangled between anger and fear. I didn't pick up. The voicemail transcribed itself across my screen. "Please, Piper, talk to your sister. She's not herself. She needs you." I stared at the message for a long moment, realizing how strange it felt to be asked for help not because I was the weaker one, but because I was the steadier one. I made coffee slowly. The smell grounded me. My laptop still glowed with spreadsheets, invoices, and new property documents from Mr. Morales. Work had replaced noise with clarity. My days now followed a rhythm built on logic, not emotion. It felt unnatural to interrupt that rhythm for a crisis born of vanity, but curiosity still lingered like a bruise. I typed Savannah's name into the search bar. The internet didn't disappoint: videos, threads, commentary dissecting her fall like vultures around a carcass. People were guessing how much she'd lost, who betrayed her, which of her friends had sold the story. And then there was the clip, a live stream she had posted hours earlier, sobbing in a dim apartment, mascara streaked, voice breaking as she apologized to followers she'd never met. I watched for less than 10 seconds before closing it. The sound of her crying didn't stir pity, it stirred memory. I remembered laughter at my expense, the smirk when I was treated as invisible, the tone that made my labor feel like humiliation. Now that same voice was begging faceless strangers for forgiveness. The irony didn't feel sweet, it felt exact. Later that afternoon, Mr. Morales emailed me, another property, another assessment. Opportunity moving forward, quietly. I accepted immediately. I didn't need celebration. Progress itself was reward enough. As I printed documents for the next project, my phone vibrated again, another message from Mom, shorter this time. "Please, just check on her." The truth was, I already knew what I'd find. Savannah's disasters were never small. She lived like fireworks, spectacular, expensive, and short-lived. There was nothing for me to fix because she had built her entire identity out of appearance, and appearance doesn't heal. Still, I drove once past her neighborhood that evening. Her car was gone, the driveway empty, a single box left outside near the trash bin. Rain had started, gentle but cold. The cardboard darkened, sagged, collapsed. Whatever it held bled ink down the curb, a symbol too precise to be coincidence. I didn't stop. I didn't need to go inside. Seeing the ruin was enough. Back home, I opened my laptop again. Numbers greeted me: contracts, timelines, profit margins, tangible things that obeyed logic. Things that didn't lie. I realized then that power isn't about control over others. It's the ability to decide where your attention goes. I chose to spend mine building, not rescuing. Grandpa Frank's voice echoed in memory, low and calm. Strength is what stays standing after everyone stops clapping. He had been right. I understood now. When I was younger, I thought revenge would look like confrontation words thrown like stones, scenes with witnesses. But real revenge is quieter. It's success seen from a distance by those who once doubted you. It's being unreachable when they finally call. By night, the world outside dimmed. Savannah's name still trended online, each headline another small obituary for her image. My phone kept lighting up Mom, Dad, even an unfamiliar number that might have been her. I turned it face down on the table. In that silence, I realized something deeper than satisfaction. I had outgrown them not by height, or wealth, or recognition, but by truth. My worth no longer required their approval. Their crisis no longer demanded my attention. I stood by the window, the city's lights reflecting faintly on the glass. Somewhere out there, Savannah was learning what it felt like to lose the applause. Somewhere, Mom was asking herself where her stable one had gone, and somewhere, Grandpa was probably shaking his head with that quiet pride he never announced. I deleted the message thread not in anger, but in finality. My phone screen went dark, showing only my reflection. For the first time, it looked like peace. The fall wasn't mine anymore. The morning light came through the blinds like thin lines of gold across the floor. I had been awake for hours, waiting for the call that finally came. The attorney's office confirmed the reading of Grandpa Frank's will. The words felt distant, heavy, but not surprising. He had been fading quietly for weeks, his body slowing down in the same unhurried way he once walked through his workshop. When I arrived, the conference room smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. A long table divided the people who had already divided themselves years ago. Mom sat stiffly, hands clasped, eyes red but not from grief. Dad avoided my gaze, adjusting his cufflinks like a man trying to control something he no longer owned. Savannah was already there composed, dressed carefully, her hair perfect again, as if appearances could erase collapse. The attorney spoke in a voice trained to carry through silence. He explained the formalities, the signatures, the witnesses. I listened without reacting, my eyes on the folder in front of him. He began to read. Grandpa Frank had been deliberate. Each paragraph was measured, plain, written in the language of a man who never wasted words. There were small provisions for charities he had supported quietly. Then came the personal bequests. His tools were to go to a local trade school, his truck to a neighbor who once helped him fix a fence. And then the estate. To my granddaughter, Piper for her persistence, independence, and integrity. I leave the property at Hawthorne Street, the remainder of my savings, and full rights to all associated investments. The room froze. The sound of the clock on the wall seemed louder. Savannah shifted in her chair, a sharp inhale breaking the still air. The attorney continued reading, his voice steady, professional, impartial. Savannah's name came later attached to a modest fund, for education or rebuilding purposes. No property, no control. Just a single line that ended with a period heavy as judgment. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. The heat of disbelief and envy radiated across the table like static. Mom's hand twitched toward her, then stopped. Dad exhaled through his nose, already calculating explanations. The attorney asked if there were any questions. No one spoke. Papers shifted. Pens clicked. My name was printed on too many pages to ignore. When the session ended, they lingered. Savannah's voice cracked once barely audible as she asked for clarification. The attorney repeated the paragraph exactly as written. There was nothing left to interpret. Grandpa had made sure of that. I stood slowly, sliding the folder into my bag. I thanked the attorney, my tone polite but hollow. Behind me, Savannah whispered something that might have been my name, or maybe just air. I didn't turn around. Outside, the sky had that cold blue clarity that comes after rain. I walked to my car, the weight of keys in my pocket strangely familiar. Grandpa's truck sat in the lot across the street, parked by someone who had driven it there for me. The sight hit harder than the inheritance itself. It wasn't about money. It was about being seen correctly, finally, by the one person who had always looked beyond appearances. As I started the engine, I thought about silence, how it had followed me through every insult, every dismissal, every dinner where my worth was weighed against Savannah's shine. That silence had never been weakness. It had been patience, and patience, when it ends, sounds like justice. Mom texted me later that afternoon. The message was long, full of reasons and history, trying to rewrite fairness into favoritism. I read it once, then deleted it. Dad's came next, shorter. We can discuss adjustments. I didn't answer that one either. There was nothing left to adjust. Savannah's number appeared on the screen last. The preview showed only 2 words. Why you? I watched the bubbles pulse, waiting for more, but none came. The question hung there, fragile and final. I didn't type anything. Because the truth wasn't for her, it was for me. Grandpa had taught me that work done quietly still counts, that dignity doesn't ask for an audience. His will wasn't revenge, it was recognition. He had seen me working when no one else cared to look. He had left me something more than property. He had left proof. As I drove toward Hawthorne Street, I passed the old workshop where he used to fix things that others threw away. The building looked tired but alive, like it was waiting. I parked, stepped out, and let the wind carry the smell of oil and pine into the air. The space wasn't empty, it was ready. I unlocked the door. Inside, dust floated through light like memory made visible. His tools still hung in perfect order. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it hummed softly, almost kind. I realized then that revenge hadn't been the goal. Freedom had. And freedom doesn't roar, it exhales. Before leaving, I placed my hand on the workbench and whispered a thank you I didn't need to say out loud. Then I walked out, locked the door, and didn't look back. The road stretched open in front of me, wide and sunlit. The engine hummed steady beneath my hands. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from anything. I was driving toward myself. There is a point where survival turns into ownership. I did not notice it happening at first. It did not feel dramatic or cinematic. It felt calm. Life settled into something steady after I walked away. My days belonged to me. My time answered to me. I worked with Mr. Morales on a rotating set of properties that other people had given up on. Old distribution sites, storage facilities left behind after businesses folded, half-cleaned commercial spaces where someone had walked out and never come back. I went in, documented what existed, defined what had value, and turned that into structured recovery. The work demanded clarity and discipline, and I realized I had both. Money stopped being a source of fear. I could cover my rent, keep my accounts clean, and build something in my own name. I opened a separate savings account and watched the numbers rise in small, honest steps. I learned to understand contracts. I learned how insurance actually pays out, and how liability really works, not the version people talk about to sound smart at dinner. I understood that leverage in this country is rarely emotional, it is paperwork. And with every new job, one truth became sharper. I did not owe chaos my attention anymore. Savannah faded from my daily thoughts the way a loud commercial fades once you mute the television. Her name still showed up online sometimes, but the spike of conversation around her had burned out. Brands had cut her loose. People who once posed in her pictures had distanced themselves. Image is a currency here, and hers had devalued fast. She tried to rebuild by leaning into sympathy. She leaned on words like healing and growth and unfair. But growth without accountability is only rebranding. Sympathy dries up in America when money gets tight. People will applaud your drama, but they will not fund it forever. She learned that in real time. Mom tried to keep the family looking intact. She sent out seasonal photos, carefully staged in neutral rooms, pretending nothing had broken. She spoke in phrases about a rough patch and just needing some time. She wanted the story to sound temporary, fixable, almost elegant. The truth was not elegant. The truth was structural. Dad focused on logistics, not emotions. He told anyone who quietly asked that things were handled. He acted like control still lived in his hands. It didn't. Control had shifted away from the people who spoke loudly and toward the one person they underestimated for most of her life. That transfer wasn't loud. It just became obvious over time when people realized who could still pay their bills and who could not. That part mattered. Money is not character, but responsibility is. Responsibility shows up on paper, in signatures, in the way your name appears on accounts and property records. Responsibility leaves a trail. When Grandpa Frank put assets under my name, he did not just leave me things. He left me proof that he trusted my judgment. He did not trust their performance. I visit his workshop sometimes, not to grieve, but to calibrate. I unlock the door, walk the length of the floor, feel the weight of the air. The tools are gone now, donated the way he wanted. The walls carry faint outlines where they used to hang. The space is mostly empty. I like it better that way. Empty leaves room for a future you build intentionally. When I stand there, I don't relive pain. I study distance. Distance is powerful. Distance is clean. Distance is earned. There is a version of this story that ends with forgiveness. People like that ending. It feels comfortable. It suggests that every fracture in a family is just a temporary crack, and if everyone cries hard enough, the pieces slide back into place. That version is convenient. It is also dishonest. Here is the honest version. Sometimes the people who share your last name are the ones who will use your labor and insult you for doing it. Sometimes the people who raise you will feed a fantasy in one child, and quietly drain the other to keep that fantasy alive. Sometimes love is conditional, and the condition is obedience. You are allowed to walk away from that. You are allowed to say no, even if you are called cruel for saying it. You are allowed to protect yourself financially and emotionally and legally. You are allowed to refuse contact. You are allowed to end a pattern instead of inheriting it. You are allowed to stop cleaning up messes you did not make. That is not betrayal. That is self-respect. In my case, walking away wasn't an act of anger. It was an audit. I looked at what each relationship cost me and what it returned. The math did not justify staying. That is all. There is nothing dramatic about the truth once you let it stand without apology. I did not go back to play mediator. I did not offer statements to defend Savannah's image. I did not soothe Mom's embarrassment. I did not let Dad reframe my grandfather's choice as a misunderstanding. I did not pick up the phone and make it easier for anyone to keep pretending. Instead, I built a life that does not require their version of love to function. That is the part people never warn you about. Peace can feel unnatural at first. Chaos trains your body to believe that tension is normal. Quiet feels suspicious in the beginning. Then, slowly, quiet becomes oxygen. Now, when I sit at my own table, I don't brace for comparison. No one is grading me against Savannah's shine. No one is treating my work like something to laugh at while eating food I helped pay for. My value is not a debate topic. It's a documented fact. And if you are listening to this and something in you felt recognized, not entertained, I want you to hear this part clearly. You do not have to wait for permission. You do not have to wait for an apology. You do not have to wait for them to understand. You can choose yourself before anyone else validates that choice. You can start over without announcing it in a dramatic speech. You can stop showing up for people who only call you when they are on fire. You are not cold for doing that. You are finally warm to yourself. If any part of my story touched something you have lived, I want you to tell me. Use the comments and say what you couldn't say at your own table. If you're reclaiming your space, hit like so more people see this. And if you want more true stories about family, money, boundaries, and quiet payback, subscribe and stay here. We listen, we don't judge, we protect our own now.